3, 2, 1. Beautimus. I am joined today on my left-hand side by my brother Sean Havoc, and on my right-hand side is Lee. Lee is going to be with me on a lot of these shows, and he is basically the straight man, right, to my comedic genius, which doesn't exist. Okay, so basically Lee and I used to have, and still do have, these long drawn-out conversations about what's going on in our lives, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing 50 and Coping. 50 and Coping is about situations in life, mental health, and coping, making sure that you can find a way to get through every day the best way you can. And what works for some people won't work for others. We're not, well, me and Lee aren't industry professionals. Sean is, that's why he's here. Sean and I basically have the same past in taking drugs. He has been clean for 20 years and I've been clean for 13 years. So we come from the same past, if you like. So, how are you, Sean? Are you good?
I'm all good, thank you.
That's cool. Thank you for coming in. This is good. Lee,
Very well.
you good?
I'm good.
Okay. Now, what I wanted to do really is talk to you about how, you know, your past, we got into some pretty serious situations, mostly due to our taking of drugs and all of that. I think, to be honest, we'd have been involved in those situations without the drugs, but they did exacerbate it.
Yeah, they didn't make things any better.
No, we've known each other a long time. So basically, when did you first take drugs? How did it start?
Oh, crikey. I think it probably started with the odd bifter, the odd cannabis joint.
Okay.
I was a bit of a glue sniffer when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And it just, you know,
Spiraled out.
went into the mushrooms, psychedelics, that kind of stuff. And then I didn't really bother for quite a while.
Yeah.
Then I met you.
Yeah.
And then we enjoyed pleasures to excess.
And also, that was the thing. In those days, we did enjoy it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the sad thing that I can't say to you as somebody who you know, isn't or hasn't taken drugs is I can't say that I had a terrible time until I did. Right, so now, what do you do for a living now, Sean?
I am a substance misuse counsellor, recovery worker, case manager.
Okay, can you elaborate on what do you do every day?
So I help people who want to stop taking drugs or stop taking alcohol.
Okay, so they choose to stop before they see you, or
yeah, they've got to, you know, there's got to be a willingness. You can't enforce treatment on anyone, so there's got to be a willingness for them to come in. You do a comprehensive assessment on them, so you take all details, you go right through their past, right through their history, and then you use various psychosocial interventions.
what does that mean?
Psychosocial interventions are talking therapies.
Okay.
So you use some cognitive behavioural therapy. You might use motivational interviewing techniques.
Yeah.
You do some trauma-based stuff with them.
When you go back through their life, are you looking for triggers? Are you looking for the source? Because I've often wondered, right, so there are many different ways of getting off drugs. Okay, you know, 12 steps, you know, going through to recovery, people such as yourself. But I didn't do either of those. I had to get clean because I had a bad downfall in my health. So how do you know what's best? How do you know how to help somebody? What are the triggers that you're looking for in an addict?
So there's different kinds of addiction. You know, obviously there's physical dependencies and there's psychological and social addictions. So really, you go back and you find those triggers, and generally there's some form of trauma.
Right.
So if you delve into someone's history, there'll be a traumatic event, and when you're exposed to trauma, you're locked in that trauma physically. Your brain changes; it kind of rewires itself.
Okay.
Not everybody that's had trauma uses drugs to cope, but there's always a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So, but people that use drugs in a dependent manner are generally the people that come to me.
Okay, so I know this isn't about me, but I don't see that I had a trauma that caused my addiction. My addiction was very much started, right, we're going out, we're going to have a weekend on the piss, we're going to do that, we'll get some Charlie, we'll you know, do it up. And then it started to become, instead of like a once in a while thing, it became an everyday thing. Cocaine as well is only addictive in the moment.
It's psychologically addictive.
Yeah. So it's not heroin, which is, you know, where your body physically needs it.
Right.
But you get into a pattern. So, you know, it used to be, right, Friday night, here's the thing, we'll go find a dealer, we'll score, we'll do what we've got to do, we'll take some gear, when we run out, we'll do some more, or we'll stop, whatever. And the trouble is, it never stops. But, so they're the different kinds of addictions for me. I don't think my addiction came from trauma. I think it became every day. And then obviously I got involved in selling and all of that. But, so I think I'm very lucky in as much as that I never depended on it for my life to carry on. So, but the people you deal with, basically, if you know, they're mostly trauma based, are they? Like, you know, they
yeah.
So they do that. How do these people find you to come to you for these things? How do they find the help they need?
You can look on the internet and just Google, like, you know, drug treatment.
So they're not referred to you from somewhere
Sometimes,
else?
yeah, but they can do self referrals as well, so they can just come in, get assessed, and then start treatment there. But we take professional referrals as well.
So, okay, so I'm interested because I've never talked to you about this. So what's the process? They come to you and say, I need help.
Yeah.
Right, one, that's really good to know that actually there is help, because obviously there is a lot of, and I call them hopeless addicts because they think there is no future for them.
Yeah.
And it's nice to hear that they can go to somewhere and get help. So what's the process? When they obviously you can't give details, but...
Yeah. So come in, do a general kind of assessment where we take some details, contact details, then we'll book them a slot.
Yeah.
Because a comprehensive assessment usually takes about an hour and a half.
Okay. So after the assessment, do you always know after the assessment what the problem is, or
because generally they'll tell you anyway. They'll be like, you know, well, I've got a heroin problem. I'm taking this much every day, physically dependent. So you know you're going to have to get a prescription for them, some sort of OST, some sort of opiate substitute treatment. Right. And there are quite a few on the market, but the two kind of predominant ones are methadone, and a substance called buprenorphine. Right. Which does the same job, right. But that's administered in the form of a pill.
Okay. Educate me on methadone. Now, why is it better to take methadone for years than to take heroin?
I'm going to cause a bit of controversy here, but it's really not.
It's not. I mean, I see that, and I'll be brutally honest with you, I see that as taking you from one drug to another.
That's exactly what
it is. So is that deemed to be a clean drug, though, because you know where it's coming from?
And because it's clinically measurable as well, so you can give a specific dose, and that makes it easier to either increase it or decrease it. With
the idea that they would slowly be decreased off it. Is that the plan to start with, even if that doesn't happen eventually?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, a lot of people don't want that. A lot of people would be quite happy to be maintained on methadone.
Just be medicated.
Yeah.
Is there a high with methadone?
Not as much kind of euphoria, but it's got a sedative effect. So if you go into higher doses, there's a bit of a cloudy feeling.
Okay.
But because it's in its effect, it's very similar to heroin. So it's a physical and emotional painkiller as well. So people that come to us with trauma, you know, and they go on to maybe, you know, into methadone prescribing, it kind of helps them mentally as well. Okay.
So, I mean, I just, like I say, I mean, I came out of the drugs and then turned to food. And so I obviously have some kind of addictive personality because when I stopped taking the cocaine then and by then the heroin, I was very lucky. I didn't go too far down the road with heroin. I only was taking that for a month or so. But what I was doing was what we like to call the Nicky Six syndrome. You know, shooting heroin and then shooting coke, just highs and lows. And
it's really dangerous.
Yeah, well,
really dangerous.
Yeah. Well, then what happened was my kidneys packed in.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's what happened. But I think I was very lucky. Well, I'm very lucky, one, to be alive. But two, also, when drugs become insular, instead of taking coke when you go out and you're partying, I'm with you, we do go out and we, you know, do whatever we wanted to do, get into whatever trouble we got into, you know, but it was always on the premise of having fun and being out. But it did start to become, didn't it, when we even though we were together, we would plan to sit around a mirror with beers and things all night.
Yeah.
And we did that several times. And I had a great time, and don't get me wrong, you know, I had a good time doing it. But when it becomes insular, you're inside, then and I'm not blaming you for this. This is what happened. You left and found a different way.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I'm proud of you for doing. That's amazing. But I didn't. And so then I'm on my own in a room with all these things. Access to every drug.
Yeah.
Because of my contacts. And found myself happy to be alone using. And then you start going down the rabbit hole. You start finding positions like, okay, well, I'm not high enough. How do I get high? Okay, well, I'll start shooting it. Yeah, that's a great idea. Why don't I inject myself? The only good thing was obviously I had lots of medical professionals, always new needles, never had to share anything, never had a dirty anything. You know, obviously I've been involved with tattooing as well, so everything was cleanliness.
So you know all those risks, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing was I never thought about overdose. I never thought about, you know, oh, if I inject these, I'm going to do this, if I take too much. And I've heard about, you know, famously Stephen Adler, you know, having a cocaine-induced stroke and all of that. I mean, there were points where I was just constantly using. You know, it wasn't a gram here and there, it was an ounce, it was half an ounce, you know, and doing it till it's gone. How do you pull someone out of a cycle if they don't want to be pulled out of it?
You can't.
Exactly.
If somebody, you have to be willing to change, and the big saying is that they have to have reached rock bottom. You know, so you know your client demographic has to reach rock bottom before they're willing to change. It's about faith, I think. It's about faith. What I do is I have faith in people's ability to change, people's ability to recover.
Okay, we're not talking God faith.
No.
Faith in the human being.
Yeah.
Okay. When they've reached the situation where they can go no further, there's two ways to go. There's either dead or up.
Yeah.
So you need to get to that. Do you think it's a conscious thing? Like, do you make that decision to stop, or do you just arrive at that conclusion?
I think people have different ways. You know, I personally reached a conscious decision where I can't be doing this anymore.
Was there a trigger for that? I mean, was that because we had a bender of a weekend? Yeah,
we had several benders of weekends, but we had a big one, didn't we?
Yeah, we had a big one, and that was. And I remember, I don't know if you're all right talking about this, but I remember we'd run out of gear, but we had some painkillers that we could make powders.
Oh yeah, that one.
So we emptied out the canisters of the pills just to take something. Luckily, I think that's what caused us to pass out in the end.
I think that was tramadol. We were snorting.
I
think we were snorting tramadol. Yeah.
That's always a great thing to do. What was it? Was it after that weekend that was heavy? Was it after that? Because you disappeared very quickly after that.
It was a bit after. I think really the trigger was meeting my wife.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go massively into it, but I had a halfway decent childhood, but I grew up without a father. Mm-hmm. Didn't have a biological dad. He wasn't around. He was absent. So my male role model, my positive role model, was my grandfather.
Who was an excellent man.
Yeah, who you met several times.
What did he do for a living?
Lots of things. He'd started off working in Smithfield Meat Market.
Yeah.
He was a bummeree.
A what now?
He was a bummeree.
Which is what?
It's an independent porter.
Right.
That will work for loads and loads of different different companies, and they'll go and load up lorries or they'll do whatever, and they get paid by the job.
Right.
So that's how he started,
yeah.
And then he was employed by a big Argentinian beef company.
Right.
You know, and he was like a shop steward and a manager, and obviously then Second World War came along. He went into the Navy.
Yeah.
When he came home after the war, he went back to that, and then cables.
Yeah, don't worry.
And then he ended up working as a caretaker in a school.
Yeah. But wasn't he involved in the whole wrestling?
He was an amateur wrestler, yeah.
But
he
he
was an amateur.
taught some of the big boys.
He did, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
we're talking about what, Giant Haystacks and Big Daddy, that era of wrestlers. Who
A little bit before then, actually. So he knew people like Mick McManus, Alan Dennison, I think.
Yeah.
So a lot of those people went to his gym.
Yeah.
In Redbridge, in Essex. So yeah, he had that sort of involvement with them as well. And I think that's probably where I got me love for martial arts.
Yeah, because
from him.
A lot of your life has been martial artist.
Yeah.
You reached a pretty high level as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
What was it? I don't know. I don't understand, but it's like 7th Dan, black belt.
It's fifth. Yeah, I've got a 5th Dan, but I've also got a 3rd Dan as well. Yeah.
But did you not have your own martial art ratified?
Yeah, kind of.
So did you?
Basically, it was just a mixed martial arts school, really.
Right, but that's pretty big. I mean, by the way, I've got my own martial art, and I'm a 5th Dan black belt. I tear you up, and put you in a fridge, which is what I've said quite a lot to you over the years. Do you think your martial arts kept you from spiralling further than you did?
Oh yeah.
Because of the training, because of the
that kind of discipline, yeah.
Yeah, because it's interesting. It's interesting that I've had no discipline my entire life. I had an amazing childhood, in as much as my mother and father were very loving, and I only found out about things that weren't right there later on when I was an adult, and also after my mother had passed. I don't know. I tell you where I'm going. I think I'm looking for my trigger. I'm looking for why I acted the way I did. And obviously, and everyone goes, oh, and well, you spiraled around the time that your mother died. It's like, well, I didn't, because she died, and I spiraled big style way after that. And I don't, maybe there is no trigger. I just did it because that's what I was doing.
Doesn't necessarily have to be at that particular time.
All right.
So it could well have been, your mum's passing.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to put that on her. I think I was just a fuck up, which is all right, ladies and gentlemen, to be a fuck up.
We're all fuck ups.
So generally, with the people you see, there is always a trigger, is there? Or because from a non-drug taker's perspective, I think it's probably a fairly common view in our world that people start with a few joints, progress to cocaine, potentially progress to harder drugs, and that's how you end up with a drug addict.
Yeah.
It's just kind of habitual, starts as a social thing, gets out of hand.
Yeah, for a lot of years there was this thing about cannabis being this gateway drug.
Yeah.
Oh, if you smoke a spliff, you're going to end up as a heroin addict. No, it doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't.
No.
I started taking speed because I've always been hurry up. I've never been slowed down until I needed to slow down to get
Did you
high.
smoke before you took speed?
Smoke what?
Nicotine, cigarettes.
Well, I've always smoked cigarettes, yeah.
Nicotine is a massive, massive gateway because when you take any kind of stimulant, and nicotine's a stimulant, it rewires your brain. You form a circuit, a learning pathway that then predisposes you to take other stuff.
Well, I started smoking when I was 11, 12, here and there, like, cigarettes and yeah. I was never really interested in joints, mostly because I had an experience where we were smoking sticky black tar, Moroccan black. And basically what you do, kids, if you're listening, don't listen now. Basically what you do is this stuff you can pull off a bit, make it into like tubes, like little sausages, put it in your joint. And it's the only one that I really like, but I went too far and I smoked too much. So I ended up talking to Ralph on the Great White Telephone and then became the most paranoid human being on the planet.
Jim threw a whitey.
Yeah, no, I threw a spectacular whitey. And all of my friends are like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're the drug taker. And I'm like, not this, I'm not. No. Now, I like that sticky black simply because it gave you a mellow. If I had more than half a joint, I'm done, man. So I realised then, these are not the drugs you're looking for.
Yeah.
We saw the Dalai Lama this morning.
We did see the Dalai Lama.
We saw the Dalai Lama this morning driving a purple Hyundai.
Yeah, but neither are you on drugs, though, yeah?
Yeah, no, we're clean.
I think we're just reminiscing in those experiences. We've still got the neural
shared experience. Anyway, sorry, I don't know where that came from, but we really did, right? He was driving a little purple Hyundai looking really confused. So, okay, so you have moved on past that. You've met your wife and you settled down. What's the beginning of path of your career to that? Because before that, you were a bouncer. We
can't call them bouncers. We don't call them bouncers anymore.
What?
I was just consummate security professional. You know.
I was a bouncer. I don't really give a monkey's arsehole.
So when I met my wife, at that time I'd moved into education. I was teaching life skills for our local college,
right.
and then I was running a community arts project for Essex County Council at the same time, working with young offenders. So doing that kind of back to back. My now wife was living in a beautiful little seaside town called Cleethorpes.
Beautiful.
It was lovely. I loved Cleethorpes.
Yeah, you really did.
I really did like Cleethorpes.
Incidentally, heroin capital of the north, but yeah.
Grimsby. That's the capital. Okay. So I moved up to live with her and couldn't do that job, so I couldn't do a 5-hour commute every day.
No.
It was mad. So I looked for some voluntary work, and I volunteered for a quite a large substance misuse treatment organisation.
So volunteering first.
Yeah. Within a couple of weeks, they said, "Do you want to do some, paid work? Do you want to do some part-time work?" Because I'd started writing programs for them, like delivering PowerPoint sessions and stuff.
Look at you and your computer.
Yeah, I know. I'm quite good at that.
Who knew? Was that a conscious decision to sort of give back after you got clean, or was that you've always been sort of community?
I just thought it'd be interesting, and it really was. Basically, what it was a full-time centre for people that are in a criminal justice system. Right. So people that were on what used to be called DTTOs, they were drug treatment and testing orders. So if you commit a crime that is drug related, whether that be, possession with intent to supply or drug driving or whatever, you go before a magistrate, and a magistrate can make up their mind whether they're going to send you to jail or whether they're going to give you a community order. They're DRRs now. They're different thing. But we had a full-time 9 to 5 centre where they came in and then they didn't leave until 5 o'clock. So it's kind of like a day rehab kind of thing.
Okay.
And then we did everything. We did testing, we did information sessions. We had prescribers on site as well, so we had an on-site doctor who would write prescriptions.
Yeah.
So I volunteered for them, then did some sessional work, and then they made up a job for me. And that's how it all started.
That's how it started from there. And you lived in a palace of a flat.
It was enormous, wasn't it?
The flipping front room was bigger than the whole of my shop.
Yeah.
Which I was jealous of. But then you moved to where you are now, right?
Yeah.
From there. Okay, we won't say where you live because
people will come looking.
People will come and knocking, right? But basically, he lives in the north.
Yeah.
And he lives with people who have whippets.
And flat caps.
Flat caps, the whole north stereotype.
But also, I've discovered the culinary delicacy that is the butter pie.
Butter pie?
Yes, it's a potato pie, but it's good, man.
You've just swapped drugs for potatoes.
It's probably, potato pies.
Listen, whatever works, right?
I'll get some shipped down to you. They're brilliant.
No, don't do that. I don't eat carbohydrates. His wife will shoot me in the face. Okay, so you go from volunteering, you move to a different place in the north. What happens then? Where are you at then? You've had this job. How long were you at the job in Cleethorpes?
Couple of years, 18 months, couple of years, and then we decided that we wanted to move back to where my wife was brought up.
Right. Okay. So, what do you?
Big shout out to Emma.
Hello, Emma. What is the driving? You said, "Oh, I'm trying to get at something, and my brain isn't functioning." When I quit, when I came out of all the drugs and everything, I was thinking, I was seeing what you did, and I was understanding that you were doing this rehabilitation for people and you were mending people as I saw it, but then I had a knee-jerk reaction to that and wanted to do what you were doing and wanted to help people and I could use my experience and do it. And there's a lot of ex-addicts, and I think you were alluding to this, that that when you come out of it, you want to become better, and I think subconsciously you were trying to make amends for your behaviour, because let's face it, my behaviour was pretty fucked. I don't agree with the 12-step program for me personally. If it works for people, that's great. And we're going to talk to Chris Love in the next show, who is the guy in a rehab centre who went through Narcotics Anonymous.
So he's a stepper then, yeah?
He's a stepper, and it worked really well for him. He was down.
Kind of
and he did
50-50.
so good. Yeah. The only thing with the 12 steps is that, you know, as far as I might be speaking, put me right if I'm wrong, you kind of have to make amends.
Yeah, it's a big part of...
And you have to go and say to the people you think you've wronged and all that. I think I would have been too ashamed to do that, and I understand that that's part of it, you know, looking at your behaviour and showing everything the way it is in reality, you know, what you've done, how you behave. I honestly think if I had to do that, I wouldn't have. I'd have run away from that. I have looked at my behaviour and looked at the way I am, and I'm genuinely, you know, even 13 years on, still trying to make myself a better human being. Do you have to make amends, do you think? Do you? Is it part of it?
It's part of the 12-step process, but you don't have to follow 12 steps.
No, I'm not. What I'm asking is, do you think for your own freedom from addiction, do you think that you need to... What am I saying? Right, when I came out, I wanted to be like you. I wanted to help people. I wanted to use my experience. No, when I came out of the drugs, brother mine.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is I then wrote a song called Self-Made Angel.
I remember that song.
Yeah. Okay. Now, basically, you're trying to make yourself out now, because of how bad you were, you're trying to make yourself into something so much better, almost to the point of perfection. And as you know, perfection's not attainable, right? But you can strive to be the best human being you can be. Now, I haven't reached that. I upset people constantly, right? And I don't mean to. That's just who I am. But do you think do you think a lot of addicts do that? Do they come out of it and then when they're free of it, they want to make amends, or they want to use what they've done? I mean, is that a thing, or is that...
There's a real high percentage of people that want to give something back.
Yeah.
You know, if they've exited treatment, a lot of people come back as volunteers and then end up as full-time members of staff.
Yeah.
It's a big thing in the recovery community, is that lived experience.
I think, and I'm a strong believer in this, that you can't help somebody unless you've been there. Right? I mean, there are people who haven't, you know, and done all that, but then they do a great job, and I'm not belittling anybody. But can you understand an addict? Do you understand us as addicts, as people who...
No, I'm intrigued by it, but I don't understand it, no.
I'm glad you said we're addicts, because we are still addicts.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick a hole in something you said earlier on. You said ex-addicts, and there's no such thing as an ex-addict.
And you should pick a hole in, because addiction doesn't leave you.
No.
Also, I have addictive traits now.
That's because your brain's physically changed by addiction.
So my addiction has literally rewired my head.
Yeah, you formed a neural pathway because as part of a learning process. So addiction really is part of a learning process.
Right.
So you actually form a physical pathway in your brain that you can see under a microscope, and that is...
Holy shit, I did not know that.
Did you not know that? Yeah, whatever your drug of choice is, and that includes nicotine. In fact, that includes anything that you do. Every time you pick up a book, you form a neural pathway. That neural pathway stays active as long as you are still using your drug of choice.
Right.
When you stop, it's like an electrical circuit. It kind of...
Cuts off.
Yeah, switches off.
So if it's still there, if, God forbid, not that God exists, oh my God, existential crisis. What happens if I started using again?
Bing!
Opens up.
That circuit would flick on again. But if it was like a one-off, then it goes off again. If you continually use, then that pathway remains active again, and you're back to being an addict. Or you're back to being addicted. Because you can be an addict and not be addicted.
No. I am... Yeah, I've talked about ex-addicts a lot lately, and obviously I know that I'm in the wrong with that. But I think what I'm trying to do is distance myself from my addiction by the way I think, and that's a mistake.
You're an addict, but you're not a user.
Yeah, I'm not.
And there's a difference.
Yeah, I mean that's it, and that's an interesting point. Is the fact that once you have gone down the path of addiction. Now look, addiction isn't Friday night coke use, right? It's not. When you're out, you know, with your mates having a go, look at your behaviour. If you're watching this and you're thinking, well, I do a bit of gear, you know, what am I doing? Look, I can't tell you, drugs are not a good thing in any way. One, they're illegal. You can get you in all kinds of trouble. Also, you jump in a motor and you do all that. That's a big mistake, right? What I'll say to you is, if you're in a position where you're recreationally using drugs. You're not a drug addict, right? You're just a user. Once it takes over and you can't function, your first thought and your last thought every day is for that narcotic.
Yeah.
That's when you're an addict, right?
Yeah.
You said there were different types of addicts, right? Can we skip back to that?
You can be physically dependent on something,
Right.
or you could be psychologically dependent on something.
So, okay, sorry, yeah. So cocaine.
I have an issue with people saying that stimulants aren't physically addictive, because my professional experience tells me that anybody who takes a substance for a long time and then suddenly stops will get physical symptoms of withdrawal.
I did.
Yeah. So if you've got a 20-year coke history and you suddenly stop, your brain is used to working with a certain amount of chemicals, and then suddenly they're not there.
Okay. What's the core? End result? How does that materialise? So when you stop, what happens to you?
With something like cocaine, I mean, your sleep patterns will be disrupted. Your mood will be really, really disrupted, because you're used to having a lot of serotonin, which is like a feel-good chemical.
Come down day.
Yeah.
So the day after you stop, which in the end didn't ever happen, but the day after you stop.
Well, you remember what it's like day after a session.
Yeah. But after a session, right, you have a day where you just feel hungover and terrible, and the day after that is come down day.
Yeah.
Where your body is reacting. And there's my famous story of watching the Hovis advert where the little boy is pushing the big heavy bicycle up the hill.
Yeah.
And I cried because he had to push that bike up the hill. I've told this story before. But my reaction to things in life is not crying. It's not emotion. I'm dead inside, man. But come down is horrendous. You have no control over your emotions, your mental state, your anything, and you react either in violent anger or tears, depression, all of that. Now, serotonin, when you use a lot, now this is my understanding, put me straight. When you use a lot of drugs, the serotonin is the thing that keeps you happy, and you're on that.
Yeah.
Once you stop, you don't have an infinite amount of serotonin, do you? Or?
No, your brain constantly produces serotonin. That's a biological process. It also produces other chemicals like noradrenaline, norepinephrine, whatever you want to call it, and dopamine. And the dopamine and serotonin are the two main kind of chemicals that are concerned with your emotions. What happens is, it's not the fact that you produce serotonin, it's the way that serotonin locks onto the receptors in your brain, specifically for serotonin. And that's called reuptaking, which is why a lot of antidepressant drugs are called reuptake inhibitors, because they form a block, so you've still got a lot of free serotonin running around in your head, and your brain's not sucking it up like a sponge.
Right.
So you're balanced.
Okay.
So I really, specifically for people that have just recently detoxed, I'm a big advocate for 6 months to a year of an antidepressant,
right? Because
generally there's a real low, mood.
Yeah.
Certainly with stimulants. Someone who's been using crack cocaine for a long time, for instance, suddenly stops, detoxes himself off that, major depression. So I'm an advocate for that. It's not part of any treatment program.
No.
I just think that should be the done thing.
I was prescribed with antidepressants. Excuse me. Sadly, what they actually did was give me heart palpitations and make me sweat all the time. So I stopped taking them, and I've never taken antidepressants. I don't know anything about them apart from they didn't work for me. But after I came out of the hospital and everything, and I was starting to clean up, there was a definite, and I can almost see it as like 3 months of absolute blackness. Darkness every day, not being able to cope. I was homeless at that point as well. So when I came out, and then I was housed after. But I remember sitting in this flat that had no furniture and no anything in it, thinking, wow, this is it, man. I've hit the bottom. And I think, okay, yes, I'd made the decision to get clean, but that day was as low as I've ever been. And even when I didn't have a home I still had things. I still had, but I was set in this flat with nothing in it. And then the best thing ever happened, which was a bailiff knocked on the door for some unpaid council tax. And I went to the door, and I'd obviously been crying, and I was in a mess. And I opened the door, and he was an ex-para, because he had the parachute regiment on the thing, and he looked at me and he said, "Jesus, what? Are you all right?" And I said, "No, I've just got out of hospital. I got this." And he said, "Look, I've come to take whatever you have." And I laughed, and he went, "What?" And I said, "Come and look." And he walked into this empty flat. And he just said, "Oh, Jesus, this ain't going to float." And he said, "I can hold this off for 2 weeks, but then they'll issue a warrant," because it was council tax.
Yeah.
So he saw what was going on. And he's a bailiff, these people aren't, they're arguably, a lot of them had no feelings. They can't, because you can't do that job and, be, in empathy with anybody. But he did, and he sat down and said, "Look, what's happening? What's your future? What's going on?" And I had this little therapy session with a bailiff. And we were both sitting on the floor, and it was comical, because he was going, "You haven't got anything." And there was no furniture, no carpet, no belongings. I just had a plastic bag. And that day, that's my impetus, and it still is, to stay clean. Because if I do take drugs again, I lose my kid, my wife, my house, my dog, my business. I lose everything. And it is that bad. And yes, I'll function for a bit. But I tell you this now, my wife would go.
Do you do the cost-benefit analysis thing, like every day? Do you think, what have I got to gain, what have I got to lose? Because I still do after 20 years.
I don't do it every day, but I'm very conscious of the fact that I was in a room the other day with a whole group of people, like in this situation where they were obviously on gear and doing all that. And one of them turned around to me and said, "Oh, do you want a line?" And I said, "Mate, not only do I not want one," I said, "you don't want one either. And when you wake up in a couple of days' time, I don't want to be you." And he was like, "I thought you were." And I said, "Well, yeah, that was a long time ago, but."
So does that risk of retaking diminish over time? I mean, you just said it's interesting. You say you still do that balancing.
I don't think it does.
So you consciously are not taking.
Yeah.
You're making that decision every day.
Yeah, every day. Yeah, right. It becomes easier because you just accept that it's something you don't do it anymore. Yeah. I like to tell the last time I really had a big, serious thought about using was when a little bit after my son was born, and we were kind of he was coming off breast milk, going on to formula, and I was in the kitchen, and I was making him a bottle up, and I spilt some baby powder on the side, and I was just absent-mindedly, just kind of, and I carved it into a big fat slug, and then I took a palette, cake knife, and I carved it into 4. Yeah. And it just made me laugh.
Yeah, what on earth
it was like, of all the things to start you clucking.
Right, I mean, that's the key. The weirdest trick, like yesterday, with that glass top, I'm pointing to the coffee table, which is open. It's got a glass top and the sugar bowl, right? Talon, who works here, drops the sugar constantly, right? So I've moved it with my hand, quite consciously, into a line. Yeah. And I thought, and I'm thinking, Jesus, that's like not learned behaviour. What am I doing?
It kind of is learned behaviour.
Well, it absolutely is learned behaviour. Also, there are certain things I miss about taking. Miss is the wrong word. Basically, when you're in a situation where just press the red button, it'll go to answer machine. When you're in that situation, and I miss sitting around and chopping out, and being in charge of all that.
Yeah, those things are called rituals, and it's a big part of addiction, really, and a big part of conquering an addiction is getting rid of those.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, you can never eliminate the thoughts.
No.
But because you have a thought, it doesn't have to turn into a feeling. It doesn't have to turn into a cluck, and it doesn't have to turn into a behaviour, because you manage the thought. You distract yourself.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, Friday night, my first thought is not, I need to go and get some coke. I need to do that. My Friday night now is, I need to go home. I need to go and see my kid. I need to go and see my wife. Strike the dog on the head. Watch the stupid television box on the wall, and relax.
And go to bed.
Yeah, and just go to bed and chill. I could not be the functioning addict I was, and that is how that's how we weigh up things.
Yeah,
that's how we find nowadays that it would do so much damage to revert. But when you're in it, you'll do anything to carry on. That's the dangerous thing. It's, you know, again, for people who are recreationally taking drugs, I can't condone it. I'm not going to say it's a good thing, but you're not an addict. You know, for that, you just literally have to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, breaking your social behaviours, right? Breaking your cycles of going to the same pub with the same people, buying off the same dealer. If you do want to stop because you feel you're in the wrong place and you're at the wrong time, go to a different pub, phone a couple of different people, tell your friends what you're thinking. Because if you communicate the problem, they might well say, okay, look, yeah, we're all doing this too much. Let's have a little look at it. Before it becomes a problem, have a look at your, you know, analyse your behaviour a little bit. It's, you know, speaking as a near 50-year-old who's gone through the mill, you don't have to get to where I was or where you were.
No.
You can find a way to make, you know, make things easier on yourself by changing what you do. I had to cut a lot of people out of my life. And I feel that that's why you did that as well. Obviously, you went up north because you found who you fell in love with.
Yeah.
But it must have helped being away from the same people.
Oh, yeah.
Being away from me, I was still using.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel terrible. I'm genuine.
Just being away from you in general.
Being away from me in general is probably a good thing. But, you know, there are genuine feelings involved in that of guilt, because I would have kept you using because I was. Obviously, you're your own man and you'd have done it if you wanted to. But it would have been a lot easier to say no if I'm not in the room, you know what I mean?
I think the big thing was, it wasn't the moving away, it was falling in love. Because, and I'm going to go right into existentialism here, love is, it conquers all, it really does. And all addiction, I'm going to say all addiction, I'm really going to go out on a line here, it comes from trauma, which is basically a lack of love.
Yeah.
So in various ways it can be like, you know, you had an absent father, you may have been abused as a child, or whatever. There's always a traumatic, or you could have post-traumatic stress disorder, that could be something that's combat related if you're in the forces.
Yeah.
It's about, you know, usually violent acts which are about a lack of love. If you find love, and that can be with a person or it can be with yourself,
Yeah.
that's about 90% of the battle. It really is, yeah.
I fully agree with that. And also, I will say on this show, I've hated myself for a long time. And that is a problem. And it still is a problem, you know. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. And I think it will probably be an issue for the rest of my life. But I do see it now. You know, I do see how much hatred I push inwards, which then must reflect on the people around me. All I will say, because we're going to have to end, is that if you are struggling with addiction, talk to somebody. Find somebody who isn't involved, who isn't a user. Even if you think they'll judge you, yeah, talk to somebody, because when you voice your problems, you face your problems. And that, along with communication, right, is, you know, that communication will give you a reality check in your head. And you'll understand, you know, maybe that what you're doing is killing yourself for a reason, you know. And that, don't get me wrong, addiction, in that end, you are killing yourself. Eventually, that will end in death. You know, it might take a year, it might take 5 years, right? But it will end in death. So look, Sean Havoc, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Nice one, mate. George, as always, I appreciate your production. We do have a Patreon page. Yeah? The link's in the doobly-doo underneath. We are trying to release a podcast every 2 weeks. I will also always have some links to some people who can help you, Samaritans, people like that who you can just go and talk to. I can't give you solutions, but what we can do is talk about actual life problems and the way we've coped. I'm Jim Distortion, this is 50 and Coping. Question mark. Done.
Beautiful.
Nice, that was good.